everybody was worried. It was gorgeous sunrise. And let's see. I'm going to start with some welcome remarks and introductions. And Ronan, with the next slide. I don't think that I have an extra mic up close.
We have 4 around the space.
Yeah.
Oh, there. Okay, Justin's going to say hi and welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for making the trip down. My name is Justin Thibodeau. I'm the Associate Director here at County. Hi. Excellent. Yeah, it's a big space. Before you ask, yes, I do feel very fortunate to work in this building. That's a lot of fun. Bathrooms are over to that side of the building. It's all the plumbing is in that part of the building. We'll find out why later on the tour if we have time. I'm happy to show you all around our program. But bathrooms are there, it's 5 of them, so it's available. Single person bathrooms. The Wi-Fi password, the Wi-Fi network is connected to Lane County. So if you hop on, the password is right there. Start at BK, AT, not single at, capital S, capital BK. But really, I'm just really happy to have you all in the space. Really nice to connect with new people and have the space and tell them a little bit what we do. We are very fortunate recipients of PAC funding for some of our programs that are training youth in the workforce right now. Actually, at other space in Eugene, our tech accelerator is happening. So 18 to 24-year-olds learning IT networking support and all those kinds of entry-level technical skills, and they start internships next week. Actually, not 2 weeks. So welcome, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But if you have time to stay later on at the end of the day, I'll be giving like a short 20-30-minute tour of the space and talk more about what we do. Other than that, welcome.
Thank you, Justin. Justin's also going to be on our panel later, so you'll get to hear a bit more about their work. All right. I feel like I just have to take a deep breath and have people like sips and coffee this morning, but it's really good to see everybody. Our agenda today is a lot of not hearing from Jennifer, which we've decided to make this thing. We have a couple of presentations today. We're going to be hearing about the employer focus groups. And we're joined by Eric Jensen from Jensen Strategies. Excited to hear from Eric. Eric and his colleague Amelia have been presenting, they've presented already at the Healthcare Consortium and the Manufacturing Consortium, and I anticipate that we will have a robust conversation about the focus group findings. So looking forward to that. Today we also have a panel of regional partnerships. With the intention of really connecting consortium members as a statewide consortium, having the opportunity to connect you all with community and giving community the opportunity to connect with the work that you all are doing is part of our values. And so being here in Lane County and Eugene Springfield is it's an opportunity to hear from some great work that's happening here in the region. And then Ronan's going to be giving us a deep dive into some work that came out of a House bill in 2023 related to the roles and responsibilities of the consortium. I'm not going to give you any more seats. But there is a reason that we're going to grab lunch and eat a lunch while Ronan's presenting. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what to look forward to in 2025. Which is right around the corner. But November is this week, which is shocking to me. So I'm going to turn it over to Skip and Venkat to open us up, and then we can pass the mic for some introductions.
Thanks. I'm not going to take a ton of time with opening remarks, but I just did want to emphasize how excited I am to be here in Eugene and Springfield, and essentially having an opportunity with Future Ready to, physically go to another region of the state and get a flavor for some of the great work going on here in this area. Lane County is in many ways kind of the embodiment of a lot of the sort of goals or outcomes that we hope to see with Future Ready in terms of working with historically underrepresented communities, providing career pathways into high wage, high growth industry sectors, notably tech, but also manufacturing and healthcare. And we also have an opportunity to hear from some of our partners and member companies in the area here that are also doing great work cross sector wise. So with that, then
Thank you, it's good. I would say that I'm also grateful to have the opportunity to serve with skill on the state workforce and talent development board. And I should mention that I'm moving on from NVIDIA. I plan to continue being involved with technology adoption, particularly towards education, economic, and workforce development. So we'll see how that shapes out. But happy to be here and thank you all for coming.
Maybe Eric, before you introduce yourself. I would like to introduce you all to our new technology consortium strategist, Shauna Tice, who's joining us today. I promised her she didn't have to be in charge of anything. The one thing I was responsible for was introducing her, and I did not do that. So Shauna is joining us for her first consortium meeting. Also pleased to introduce Nick Rectowald. Nick is our new manufacturing consortium strategist, and also joining the team, Maggie Forey as our healthcare consortium strategist. The three of them are just hitting the ground running, but really excited for the leadership that they're going to bring to the consortium and the industry consortia work as a body. So they'll introduce themselves as we hand the microphone around, but I wanted to make sure I introduced them before we move on. Eric, why don't you go ahead and start introductions? We'll go that way.
Hi, I'm Eric Chancellor with Chancellor Strategies, and I am the facilitator, have been the facilitator for the tech focus groups that we've been running around the state.
Good morning, Jeff Rhodes, Arts, Information, Communication Technologies, Education Specialist with the Oregon Department of Education.
Melissa Evers, Vice President in the Office of the VP of Bid Health. Leah Bugliosi, I'm the Grants Compliance Evaluation Manager with Warm Springs Community Action Team.
I'm Homer Minnick, and I just moved to the area from the East Coast. I represent an organization called University Training Centers, that does technology like management, leadership development training. So I'm just here to learn what's going on in Brooklyn.
Good morning, Nagi Naginathan, I serve as President of Oregon Tech Farmers Technology.
My name is Faye. I'm the Director of Capacity down in Southern Oregon.
Hi, thank you for the introduction earlier today. Thank you all the manufacturing industry consortium strategists. Nice to be back here in Eugene. I spent the first 10 years or so of my career at the U of O teaching administration. So nice to be in familiar grounds.
Corinne Bouchard, I'm the Acquisition and
See if I can talk. Good morning, I'm Jeff Hampton, a Regional Development Officer with Business Oregon.
Good morning, Stacey York. I'm at University of Oregon in the Ninth Campus. I'm the Senior Director of Professional Development and Workforce Readiness, and I'll share more about what that means on panel ways.
Hello, I'm Mike Inman, CEO of 28 years, and I will also give the panel.
My name is Steve Woods. I serve as Associate Vice Provost at Oregon State University. My first meeting, so thank you.
Wade Hopkins, Director of Northeast Steam Coalition, the coalition of steam providers northeast of those coalitions.
Everyone, Sarah Foster, Workforce Labor and Peer Education Advisor for Government Protect, but formerly the healthcare industry person. Thank you. Good morning, I'm Kyle Richie-Knoll, and I'm the Director of Education and Workforce Policy for the Oregon Institute.
I'm Sean Redman, and Jennifer introduced me, so I don't have to read my title because it's also a lot. Also, you have probably Jeff the longest title, the least likely to fit on a business card. So I've come most recently from Workday. Probably a lot of you use Workday software to And many of you hate workday software for your HR and finance. So that's where I was most recently. Before that, it was just Clearwater Analytics. And then before that, I worked at Boise State University. I taught communication primarily, but also executive communication. And I also spent some time in.
Excellent. All right, very excited to dive into today's content. Ronan, and wanting somebody to keep me honest, do we have a quorum to assist minutes? We do. So you should have the August meeting minutes in your packet. If you've had a chance to review those, happy to entertain a motion to approve, or if there's any discussion. Thank you. Any edits? Question? Excellent. By consensus, are we prepared to approve the minutes as included in the packet? All right. Yes. Okay, minutes approved. Ronan, any public comments this morning? All right. Then we are ready to move on to our employer focus group findings. I promised you we would keep it moving here. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric Jensen from Jensen Strategies. As you all know, part of the work of the consortium has priority has been to hear more directly from employers. We have employers represented on the consortium, and what we heard from all of you is that we needed to do some additional engagement to really better understand what is it that employers need, and in this case, related to technology skills, and to learn more about tech communications. And so we, the HEC engaged with Jensen Strategies to conduct focus groups across the state. And Eric's going to tell you a little bit about both the process and some of the findings related to technology specifically.
Thank you, Jennifer. Is this on?
Right.
That's not. So this is actually a good introduction because this shows the extent of my tech abilities. Just trying to turn on the microphone. So again, I'm Eric Jensen. I'm the principal and founder of Jensen Strategies. We are a firm that has been running the focus groups in the 3 different industries, including tech. And I was the primary person leading the tech focus groups. It's really good to be down here in Lane County again, and it's great to see you folks in person. And some of you I've been able to talk to online. Some of you I've talked to on the phone. Some of you I've emailed. And so it's just nice to be here and nice to see the faces around the table. We've got a lot to share today, and so I'm going to try and be as concise but substantive as possible as we go through. But please know that what I'm presenting today is really a honed down summary of what we found, and the report that we are developing that'll be coming out will have more detail, a little more depth. So just to be aware of that. And I'm also going to try and leave time at the end for questions from all of you. So, Ronan, I think we're ready. Just a little bit about us. We're a management consulting firm. We started in 2012. We're based in Portland. We are public sector focused, and the vast majority of our clients are state and local government. Services we provide are collaborative decision making and facilitation, which is what the focus groups really fall under. We do organizational development, policy analysis, and we also do executive recruitment of high level public administrators. On the next one. As Jennifer mentioned, myself and my colleague, Amelia Wallace are the ones that have been doing the focus group facilitation, so we can just move on past. And there we go. Thank you. What we were looking to do in terms of these focus groups is really to be able to gather information that's going to help you folks in your discussions going forward in developing recommendations and policies on workforce development. And so we were looking for the high-tech employers to give us information with regard to their experience in workforce planning, recruitment, training, development, and retention. So kind of the full life cycle of employee of employees. So, next one. So we did 4 focus groups around the state. One in Portland Metro Region, one here in Lake County, another in Columbia Gorge, and another one down in the Road Valley. So we did make our way around the state. Next. A little bit about the focus group participants. The participants were limited to technology and tech-enabled employers. And there were a number of different sectors that were represented in these focus groups. And I'm not going to read these one by one, but as you can see, there is a very long list and diversity of sectors within the tech community. Out of the 4 focus groups that we did, we had a total of 17 participants representing 16 employers. We had on average 4 participants per session, and the attendance ranged from 3 to 5 people. And one session had 2 representatives from one employer, which explains the differential between the 17 and the 16. Moving on. So for us to prepare for this, I'm going to be very transparent. I was half joking about my ability to turn on a microphone, but I am not an IT person. And I hire people to come into our firm and take care of IT stuff. So, but we wanted to get an idea of what were some of the topics that we were going to hear about, what were some of the issues. And so we did 6 pre-assessment interviews with 4 of the consortium members, as well as 2 other healthcare industry leaders. What that did is it helped provide us with a foundation of kind of what to expect in some of these focus group conversations, how we develop the questions. And it was an opportunity for us to ask about potential focus group participants that HEC might want to invite to the focus groups. We also collaborated with HEC staff in identifying employer representatives to invite and worked with them on that, but HEC staff wasn't particularly in doing all of the invitations and the communications going forward, preparing for the focus groups. Next. We based our questions on what we understood to be the foundational focus areas that had been developed by the HEC Consortia. And so I'm assuming that you folks are familiar with these. I'm not going to again read through all of that. But demand planning, skills, credentials, education, training needs, equity and inclusion, and workplace diversity were the focus of our questions during the course of the focus groups. Next. So each of the focus groups was organized in a similar way. The agenda, we took a little bit of time at the beginning to acquaint people if they weren't familiar with Future Ready Oregon, and just to go through a series of introductions so people knew who they were. Many of them already did know each other. And gave just an overview of how we were going to conduct the focus groups. And then we divided it into, 4 different sets of questions or discussion topics. Again, following that foundational piece that you saw on the earlier slide with demand planning and recruitment, training and education, career pathways, and retention. Now, you'll notice that we didn't say anything about workforce diversity, and that is because workforce diversity encompasses all of these. So they were inclusive of each of these topics. We gave them handouts with the agenda, obviously. We also gave them the list of this group's membership in case they were curious, and some background information on Future Ready Oregon. So a little bit about just the general experience that we had with these focus groups. One of the things that came across, and this was, and frankly, all of these points were true for all of the industry focus groups that we did. It was true for manufacturing and healthcare as well. But participants were very appreciative of being invited and asked to share their input. And particularly, they enjoyed the regional approach that was taken, that we were coming to their area and talking to people in their region. They also had very robust discussions. We didn't have any wallflowers. People were good to jump in at any point. And in the context of that, they were very constructive, productive in terms of their comments. It's a very positive conversation that we were having in each of the focus groups. They also, one of the things I thought was great is that the focus group participants didn't come into the room saying, we want the state to fix all of our problems. They came in the room to say, here's what we're struggling with. Here are some things the state might be able to help with. Here are some things that we might be doing different. And they also talked about, they also had connections with each other. What we saw was this dynamic that kind of went back and forth where they would share their mutual stories and their mutual experiences. And that was really great to see. And then finally, they wanted to see that this was not the end of the conversation. They wanted the opportunity to continue being involved as this process moves forward. Moving on to the next, and then focus group findings. As I mentioned, we have these 4 different areas that we were touching base with, and I just thought that this particular graphic kind of captured the way we tackled this. But you've got overlap, and so you've got demand planning, recruitment, training, education, retention, and priority populations encompasses all of this. Move on. In terms of the findings that I'm about to walk through with you, I'd like to just point out a few things. The findings are based solely on the information that was given from those 17 participants that we heard from. There's nothing else that's being pulled in from other sources. This is strictly what we heard. The focus groups were strictly information gathering. We weren't looking to bring people to consensus, although consensus oftentimes was organically reached, but that was not the purpose. And the findings that we have here, and I mentioned this early on, it's just a summary, there'll be more in the report. Most of the findings are relevant across all of the regions that we talked to, but some are region specific. So moving on. So starting with demand planning. So well, we asked them the question of, okay, so how far are you planning out? And What we got was sort of a variety of answers, anywhere from 1 to 10 years. But I would say that the median really kind of hits on that 5-year planning period. And when you drill down a little bit about what they're planning, you're talking about things that take time to plan, facilities, capital projects, or if they have contracts that are multiple year contracts that they're working on. They were all very quick to say that really it's also very much about short-term planning, because what drives them, and I'm sure this group is well aware of this, what drives them is being able to meet the demands of their customers and their clients. And that changes, and it changes rapidly. And as you folks know, the tech world, the trends change quickly, and that really becomes much more of their focus is on that annual, quarter, monthly type of planning, even though they do have some longer term plans. They talked a little bit about some of the changing workforce, some of the challenges to long-term workforce planning. And some of the things that they brought up, of course, it's the customers, the change in the demand of what their customers are looking for, and the changing tech trends. And that really requires them to be nimble. They need to be ready to pivot and to adjust to those customer demands or those customer needs going forward. We did ask them also about AI, and what they said about AI is that it's really unknown right now how that's going to impact the workforce. It's something that's currently gelling, and everybody's trying to figure out where is that going to land in terms of workforce needs. And so that is a little bit of a wild card out there for them in terms of workforce planning right now. They see it as a positive thing, but nonetheless, it's still a little bit of a moving target. Government budgeting is also something that is a challenge for them, particularly for those that have federal contracts, like with the Department of Defense. And so they're having to watch the federal budgeting process to be able to kind of see where their clients are going to be going. And then finally, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, the changing workforce expectations. The workforce of today is not the workforce of 20 years ago. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we'll move on to the next one. We also asked them about, okay, where are you getting your data, or what data are you using in terms of doing your planning? Internally, they're looking at their revenue projections. Where is their revenue going to be coming from? And then how does that relate to their current staff allocation? Is that staff allocation still relevant? Do they have to move, shift some positions around, different skill sets? They looked at industry trends and in terms of doing a competitive analysis. What are the product demands? What are the sales projections? And just market projections in general, and seeing the direction that things are going. And then regulatory and public funding availability. Obviously, they're going to want to be in touch with what the federal and state regulations are with regard to the industry, and they're tracking, as I mentioned just earlier, public funding, particularly on the federal level. If you are looking, I just want to call this out, if you are looking at the hard copy, you'll see that those two bullets are different than what you have in the hard copy. There was a typo in there, and we've corrected it for this slide. So just want to call that out. We asked about data sources. We didn't get a lot of information with regard to data sources, but they said they use the Tech Service Alliance in getting data, as well as their local tech associations to be able to gather data as well. So moving on. We asked them then again, we asked them about recruitment and asked them, you know, what are your recruitment approaches right now? How are you going about that? The list is there. I'm not going to read through it, but I would say typically they've got the usual postings that people have with Indeed, LinkedIn, as well as looking internal to the organization and being able to move people up or around. They also attend career fairs with some of the university and colleges. And they have organizations, tech organizations that they draw from or tap into, including the Computing Technology Industry Association, Saturday Academy. And they rely on their word of mouth. And with regard to priority populations, they try to get to external affinity groups, if you will, that can help them to recruit priority populations. The example they gave was historically Black university colleges. Would be an example. And then a few of them use recruiters as well. The challenges that they're facing right now in terms of recruitment, they are, first of all, compensation is a big thing in the tech industry. And so they're competing, a lot of the mid-sized and small companies are competing with very large corporations that can offer bigger salaries to attract people. Also, just geographically speaking, salaries change with geography. And so they find that to be difficult. With regard to priority populations, they're finding themselves limited with the pools that they're getting, what's coming out of the schools, what's coming in the door in terms of applications. So they have a limitation there that they can't really control. One of the other things, and this is up there, but is the fact that some of the larger corporations that have strong DEI programs and hiring are able to attract those populations more so than smaller companies and mid-sized companies. So they're in competition for priority populations, if you will, with the larger companies. And another point that they made is that right now, these tech companies are needing experienced people who can hit the ground running. And the inadvertent consequence of that is that the demographics of the more experienced high-tech folks are white male. And so that also affects the priority population. Being able to diversify. They mentioned that tech has lost its luster. You know, it's not the days of 20 years ago where people wanted to go down to Silicon Valley and make their fortune in the startup. And so they're seeing a little bit of they're seeing a downturn in terms of interest, just by virtue of that. And for those that are not hiring remote, but are hiring on site, another challenge that they're finding is with regard to what the workforce needs in terms of cost of living, the quality of life, housing. That makes it more difficult for them to bring on-site people. All right, next one. So continuing on with recruitment, we asked them what positions they were having the most difficulty in filling. And far and away, it's that top bullet, the electrical and software engineers. That's where they're seeing a dearth, if you will. Candidates, also digital signal processing, DSP. I assume you folks don't know what DSP is. I had to learn. Engineers that are exclusive to IoT, Internet of Things. And these are pretty much in priority order. So the ones that toward the top are the ones that are more difficult than the ones on the bottom, or at least in terms of how often they were brought up. Field service engineers, trying to find field service engineers that have customer interface. The skills to be able to do customer interface. Quality management engineers, chip designers, and accounting professionals are all there. Moving on. So we asked them about education and training and where the gaps are in education and training and what their experience is, particularly with the Oregon educational system. And most of them are quick to bring up that the early education programs, particularly STEM and Connected Lane County, were ones that were brought up as offering good early education opportunities that would generate interest and experience. However, they put a footnote on it and said, yeah, these programs are great. They're doing good things, but they need to be expanded. With STEM, they talked about it would be helpful if the STEM program put a little more emphasis on tech. And they also talked about being able to expand the reach of these programs. Some programs like the Connected Lane County program are focused on priority populations. And they said that's awesome. That's a good thing. But what we'd really like to see is this expanded to other young people as well and getting into the core curriculum within the K through 12 education system. When we asked about what higher education institutions there were in Oregon, OSU came up again and again as having a robust tech program. Now, when we get to the gaps and challenges in the Oregon tech education system, the first thing they bring up is that from their perception, higher education curriculum is outdated and out of alignment with employer needs. A lot of the courses that are being taught, according to them, are using either old technology or technology that's not relevant to them. And that is probably the number one challenge and concern that they brought up. And they also mentioned that higher education graduates are not prepared for the current positions that are being offered. And with regard to that, we're talking about, first of all, that the curriculum isn't preparing them for what they need. But they also talked about the shift that we're seeing across industries where new graduates don't have the soft skills, don't have the team skills to operate in the workplace. And we've seen that across with all the industries that we've talked to. They also mentioned that leadership skills, this kind of goes in the same vein, but leadership skills and tech training are not usually integrated. So people coming out, they've got tech education, but they don't have the soft skills to complement that, to be able to move up. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in a bit. They also called out a few programs, the Career Tech Education Program. Their perception is that its implementation across the state is not very consistent, from district to district. The on-job training and subsidized work programs, they felt are not seeking business input. And for that reason, they're not being as productive as they could be, and that they're bureaucratic and difficult to access. So the next one. Career pathways, this is something that we've seen in every industry that we had focus groups for. And the career pathways for entry and mid-level employees are most often not delineated or communicated. And so people coming into the industry are not really understanding, you know, what's my trajectory going to be? What are my opportunities here going forward? They talked about missing rungs, if you will, along the career ladder. And particularly, they called out mid-management positions because mid-management positions are that transition point where if you haven't had the soft skills already, you're going to need those soft skills to transition into those leadership positions. And so they called out that in particular as being kind of a missing rung, if you will. AI, I mentioned already, it's a wild card. It's not fully known how it's going to fall within the career paths. Again, I think it's a positive thing, but it remains to be seen how it's going to settle out. Career pathways can be particularly challenging for priority populations. And reasons being, one, it's a perception issue. A perception issue by some of the priority populations of, well, this is not a job for me. This is not a direction, a career path for me to go. It's not coming on their radar that is an option for them. There's also discrepancies in different jobs, and some jobs you'll see more representation in priority populations than other jobs. And they call out the fact that it's usually in the lower level jobs that you see more of the priority populations, and not so much in the upper rungs of the organization. The one thing that they did say with regard to priority populations, and sort of a positive, if you will, for those companies that are using remote workers, that creates better access for priority populations to be able to engage or be employed. Next one. And then we asked them about retention. And with regard to retention, they talked about the contributing factors to retention that are changing. I alluded to this from the beginning of this presentation. There is this shift in the workforce, and this is again across the board in our experience, that there's a shift from a focus on compensation and benefits as being high priority. Not that they're not a priority, don't get me wrong. But the workforce is looking more for life balance, being valued, doing meaningful work, having purpose in the organization, having ownership in the organization. These are becoming much more high priority. They want flexibility in their hours. They want a sense of engagement and belonging in the organization. And in terms of the priority populations are looking for representation of people like them in the organization. And that you know, they're not the sole person in the organization representing a certain priority population. And they look for affinity groups in the in the organization as well. That's where they can interact with others. But in terms of the current retention approaches, we asked them about that. They talk about we're shifting to meet this new workplace, workforce expectation. We're shifting from an employee-focused organization to having one that's more employee-focused, but focusing on remote work on flexibility, like balance, professional development, and team approach. Some of the other things that they did, and this kind of falls along the same line. One talked about they have a shorter work week now, a 36-hour week. There's a PTO donation program. They talk about using employee surveys and quickly noting that there's no point in doing an employee satisfaction survey if you're not going to act on it. Childcare, housing assistance, and then with reference to the priority populations, they talked about doing DEI training, incorporating DEI goals in employee evaluations, and including benefits that will help the priority populations in terms of childcare and remote work. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the takeaways from these findings and then what the opportunities are. So the first takeaway, and this one goes across the board with the different industries, and that is there are more opportunities for Oregon Tech employers and higher education institutions to strengthen their working relationships and communicate and connecting education with the workforce needs. And under that umbrella, that includes curriculum development. It includes coming together on the career pathways and helping to be in sync in terms of the definition of career pathways and where people are headed, and preparing the students for the workplace by having more job exposure, having more internships, having more opportunities to learn on the job. They also talked about the tech education, the tech education program gaps, that contributes to less hiring in state. They tend to go out of state because there aren't the graduates that are coming out that meet their needs. Early education programs, again, like STEM and Connected Lane County, are a great foundation for learning, but greater tech emphasis and expanded reach would be beneficial. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Next one. So specifically with regard to the priority populations, they noted that the access to the tech industry is challenging for them, and part of that is that there is a limitation on the composition of the graduates that are coming out of higher ed to choose from, so that affects their pools. They also mentioned that there is less awareness oftentimes with priority populations of this career opportunity for them. They specifically talked about women and gender diversity as being underrepresented in the tech industry. And that also, like other members of priority populations, is due in part to just the perception that, geez, this is not a natural career. And then they mentioned the lack of early educational exposure of these tech opportunities, which is where they really felt that if you're going to generate some interest for priority populations and get them thinking about tech careers, the early education component is the one where that would have the most impact. Moving on to the next one. In terms of opportunities here, with regard to recruitment, they felt that there's an opportunity here to get larger and stronger Oregon candidate pools. One is just being able to increase the tech-focused higher education programs, having more programs in Oregon that address those workforce needs that they have. They talked about promoting and supporting and enabling other workforce training resources outside of the four-year programs. One of the things that they mentioned is, four-year programs are great, but sometimes there is an opportunity to train people directly out of high school and without a four-year degree. And they cited some specific programs, including the Career Tech Education Program. You guys say CompTIA? CompTIA? And also the Intel's program, the BCC, the Quick Start program. Those were all cited as a way to also bring people in without going into the four-year programs. And they talked about enhancing and providing more resources to early education programs. Again, we're going back to that emphasis on early education, how important that is. And they cited STEM and Saturday Academy and Connected Lake County as programs where that would be relevant. And especially important to the priority populations. In terms of trying to create a workforce environment that attracts and retains employees, especially in sort of the changing dynamic of expectations of employees, and particularly for the priority populations, they talked about being able to provide the incentives for things like childcare, housing assistance, benefits, and DEI and cultural competency training. Next, with regard to the higher education and disconnect that they see with the curriculum in Oregon, they would like to see some type of forum, some type of venue to be able to make that connection between the tech employers and the higher education community to help align the curriculum and to support associated programs related to developing a successful workforce. They talked about also the expansion of the Oregon Tech education programs, and mentioned that before, and building a system that's effective and relevant to the skills that are needed by employers. And that, of course, relates back to number one as well. And three, establishing or supporting programs that have on-the-job training, doing internships, being able to get people exposed to what they're walking into and help them understand what they need coming in the door to be successful. I'm going to pause here and just on a side note related to this. One of the challenges that they saw with this particular approach were a couple of things. One is for federal contracts, like with DOD, there are requirements, they have to be American or US citizens. And so that does present some limitations for them. But they also mentioned that there are, lost my train of thought, anyways. They also mentioned that age is an issue as well, and trying to bring people into some of the companies that are under 18, as people are, not the companies under 18, people under 18. And in addition to that, there are security issues with companies. There's only so much, they can have people do. So, and then finally, on number 4 on this slide, they're suggesting that there be incentives put in place for higher education faculty to build curriculums that result in employer hires. And they weren't specific as to what those incentives might be, but they said, let's get them on the team here, and let's get them playing together with us. Okay, next one. Incorporating soft skills, and this is, I mentioned this a number of times already, but their feeling is that there really needs to be an emphasis on soft skills in the Oregon educational system, and that is K through PhD. I mean, it's all the way through. This is something that is highly needed right now. And then they suggest giving tax breaks to companies who train entry-level employees who lack technical skills that are not available in higher education. If they're going to be training these employees because they can't get that in higher education, they feel some tax breaks would be helpful in helping them create the resources to do that. They also suggest the tax breaks for companies to do targeted hiring. So that's, for example, priority populations. And they talked about an employer opportunity. This is not something they were looking at the state to do, but rather saying, hey, one of the things we could also do is maybe provide grants and other funding to higher education tech programs. And we can help contribute toward that for those companies that can afford to do that. Moving on to the next one, with regard to career pathways, again, you're going to beginning to see some redundancy here, but working with the higher education and other tech programs to define and communicate career pathways for students. So higher education, as well as employers being able to create that, communicate that, bring awareness to career pathways in the tech industry. Yes.
You want questions now?
Well, I'm pretty close to done, so I can take questions at the end unless it's a clarification question. Okay. All right. And then they see the opportunity to use local associations to promote and educate potential workforce on tech career jobs. I'm talking about local tech associations here. The next one on retention, they suggest helping them to create workforce environments that attract and retain employees, such as on-site childcare, being able to give them, help them get the resources to do that, and enable and support them on things like housing assistance would be also helpful. They did suggest that WorkSource Oregon could be a clearinghouse for connecting jobs between employers so that they can share employees at times when maybe there's a downturn in the market and they need to cut back. Maybe an employee can work in different companies. Next one. There we go. After the questions.
So I'm curious, there was an emphasis in many of your remarks about career pathways. Can you define what you mean by a career pathway?
Career pathway is understanding what kind of trajectory you can have in your career. How do you move up that totem pole? Or how do you develop professional moving forward? Instead of, I'm going to do one job and I have no idea what's going to happen after that job at all, but really giving them the options of, here's where you can go with this. You might start in a low level position, but these are options that are open to you.
I think that's the reason I asked the question. I think it's an interesting concept in tech. I don't know if folks have similar sentiments, but my experience has been that there are some jobs in tech that have a pretty defined pathway, but the vast majority of tech jobs do not have a defined pathway because tech changes so much. And if you find a pathway, it would be obsolete the day you printed it. And most people that progress in tech, if you ask them at the beginning of their career, they'd be doing what they're doing today, 99% of people would say no. And so I think it's an interesting challenge to help communicate what's possible, but that the basic premise, my assertion would be the basic premise in tech is continual education, because it's all going to change. And so you need to adapt continually.
Absolutely. And I don't think that was lost on members of focus group. But in as much as you can create that pathway, that would be helpful from their perspective. But they do recognize that tech is changing all the time in the nanosecond. And especially with AI coming into play right now.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm glad you qualified enough for you to say this is not a consensus. You're simply reflecting what the employer told you. Like 1986, when I started teaching as a mechanical engineering faculty member with a lot of black hair on my head. I remember hosting an employee forum because I was advisor to a technical society. Many of the things I heard today, I heard in 1986. That is just the reality, right? I mean, how they should have all these other skills, etc. I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong either. It is just the case. Except for the AI and remote work, nobody considered those possibilities with face, and of course, what the employees expect in terms of accelerated advancement. That is also a little bit different. I don't think those were the questions that were asked to employers those days. But I hope this doesn't become the Godspeed in terms of the assessment. But just as one thing from through, we heard it from a great presentation from one, I think it's while I'm slipping, is it Randall that spoke at the Semiconductor Consortium a couple of weeks ago now? Anyway, I forget the vice president of Intel that spoke in the semiconductor. Russell, something to do with the LMT. Russell, he talked about, Intel anticipating 25 people to be hired each year, etc. But also, he also said Oregon does not have the scale they need. And I heard from another vice president of Intel in that previous conversation. So in general, Oregon does not have the scale. But in terms of demand, ours is certainly the smaller of the state groups. We probably have 20 graduates in civil engineering from the United States. We had 30 employers that showed up last week, 25. So, that is probably the challenge. So, people are personal health technologies do extremely well. But many of the observations you had, they were not specific, they were presented as though it's because of minority populations. It applies to all populations, really. And then one thing I'm surprised she did not come up is another sheet. The friend of mine who's a CPO for a Fortune 500 company, she's now with in Ohio. She's now with Amazon in Seattle as one of the innovation executives. She says that is doing software innovation software in a big way because of the work that's done. So I'm surprised that more working up. And those of us, as Austin is familiar with Ohio, Ohio did the third frontier. One of the things they did was to specifically invest in companies. I mean, they worked with the universities and we can send interns to the companies. A lot of the money came from the state. But what I heard from employers is, well, we already know you, we work with you. And we don't have time to mentor those young people that come in as interns. People who are working actively in the industry can relate to that. They just don't have the executive strength to be able to mentor those young people coming in for training. So I hope we don't make the problem too linear. Some of them have been lost. But I agree with you, we need to have different solutions. I think the time constants are because small. And you are right, employers want. When I graduated with my undergraduate degree, the medieval period, the employer said, come on over, know the basics, we will train you. That doesn't exist much anymore. They want them to be more career ready than they were in the past. So I hope, you have a lot of good data. I hope it is not presented as a consensus or a conclusion. We just have to make sure it's presented in the right context. There is a lot more to it.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate what you're saying with regard to, back in the days, perhaps we remember, some of the same issues were brought up except for AI and remote work. But what I would also say is that the other dynamic that I think is different right now is the workforce expectations and being able to shift with that. One of this also reminded me, one of the things that I did want to communicate is that those that participated in the focus groups were not seeing that higher ed needed to be able to train people to be able to walk in and do the job right away. They said, look, this is a situation where we are moving so fast that higher ed cannot keep up their curriculum. And so that's a reason that on-the-job training in our companies is even more important. Higher ed can still get to a point of creating the foundational tools or skills, but ultimately companies are going to have to do that. And to your point, with regard to on-the-job training and companies not having the opportunity right now to train people coming in, this is one of the reasons that they're looking for a little bit of help in terms of being able to make that shift.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more, and then we're going to show you on the panel.
All right, thank you for sharing. I had a question regarding the participants in our event. I'm interested to know what kinds of roles the participants were holding. Is this HR? Is this technical mid-level management, senior leadership? And also, what was the representation of people with priority population identities amongst this group as well? So it's going to focus on that.
Thank you. Good question. And I would say that this is true pretty much across the focus groups. People that we tended to get or were people who were either COOs, HR, talent acquisition folks in the organizations. So I would say that would be generally the case, with some exceptions in that role. In terms of priority population, we did not see a lot of folks that I think would have fit the definition that was in legislation with regard to priority population. Maybe one or two.
I think that my question is, I know that you, Eric, explored one of the themes across the three consortia. And the soft skills, the essential employability skills, I know came up a lot in the healthcare. I don't know about manufacturing. But I think it was in a different context in healthcare. It was really around supporting some of the entry level peer supports, community health workers, and then not having, I think I heard you share a little bit about mid-level management and maybe soft skills around that and just the gap. I think that we saw that in healthcare, and I'm curious if there were any other, because I'm thinking just as a consortium, how we might elevate some themes, just thinking about the WPCC and just some other ways in which I know this has come up a lot in this group. So I'm curious if the soft skills, the essential employability skills, like there was any more specificity for the tech specifically. I know specificity specifically, but.
So in terms of specificity with regard to tech, I can't say that there was a lot more detail related to that. That I could add. There may be some that I'm kind of missing off the top of my head right now. But generally speaking, these were things that we saw across the board. Their application, depending upon the industry, is different. So, take for example, tech. One of the things, particularly with high tech, is remote work. And the tech employers talk more about remote work than some of the other industries, just because that's just the nature of the business. You can do that remotely. Whereas not everybody, but other industries talk about either we want to bring people back to the office or people are in the office. The exception in the tech industry was tech-enabled companies where there are products being made where people need to be in on site. That would be an exception to what I just said. So yeah.
All right, we are at time, but we will give Ben Pat the last word.
I just wanted to address your question about business growth. From my perspective, in the tech industry, so technology is all about very complex problem solving, collaboratively, and these problems, the methods of solving change very quickly. So it's all about how adaptable you are to face new problems and solve them, and the ability to do projects, the hands-on, there. So trying to understand how things work, that curiosity, and that's what we have in this.
Great. Okay, we're going to go ahead and transition. Join me in thanking Eric. I know this is the first of many conversations. We expect the full report in December, and it will include some of those broad themes across all of the focus groups, and then additional diving into the findings for each tech, manufacturing, and healthcare. But join me in thanking Eric. And we don't have a transition break, so I'm going to just ask our panelists to head to the front of the room. Do feel free to refill your coffee as we're getting settled. And then we will have a more formal break at the end of the regional panel. You can take your time.
Good, thank you. I'd like to have each of the panelists introduce themselves and share a little bit about some of the ways that they're seeing collaboration happen in the community between employers, educational institutions and training providers, as well as the broader community and especially priority populations. So maybe we can start with Mike and then go down the line here and we'll get into some questions and we'll make it interactive. So we'll quickly transition from some prepared questions to the questions from the room. Mike.
Hi there, Mike Bigman, CEO of 20 Ideas. We are a 70-person tech company agency in the area down here. We work with companies to build software platforms, a lot of back-end server data pipeline, but also roadmaps, front-end design product. So we have a lot of wonderful team members to build those products, and so that's our focus. Two kids in the school system before day here. So, a number of different, grew up in the area, so a number of different vantage points from K-12, we were working with University of Oregon, and just sort of seeing software in general. One of the things that I see going well is we've got different groups coming together to figure out and ask that question: how can both the city, the different cities, the county partnerships work with the university, LTT, and K-12 and the business industry. I've seen ebbs and flows over time. It feels like the last few years, I see going in the right direction in terms of those conversations happening. Feels like it isn't that same, but definitely.
Good morning, everyone. I am Stacey York. I believe in the beliefs and aspirations of Oregonians and of our students in the region and state. I believe that collective efforts will have magnitude higher outcomes than individual efforts. And I get to take both of those things in my job, where I help students gain the skill set, connect with the organization that let them achieve their dreams. I do that at the University of Oregon in the Knight campus. I work with master's students who participate in about 6 months of industry-specific training that has integrated professional development and then launched into 9-month paid internships in industry. And you're going to get to hear from one of my collaborators, Jessica, on how we recently, through both National Science Foundation funding and Future Ready Oregon funding, have been able to build a pipeline that reaches into community colleges to provide I'm going to say a career pathway, knowing that we talked about there's nothing linear, often, but it is a career path into the sector. What you do afterwards, aren't direct paths, but establishing those early career skill sets so you can get your foot in the door. So we can expand our reach into community colleges completely for low-income students. And I've done a lot of work broadly with increasing representation over the last decade, seeing a 230% increase in representation amongst our student population since we launched an inclusion initiative 7 years ago, which was actually kickstarted with that $100,000 gift from Thermo Fisher that snowballed over time into $5 million of funding now for low-income students.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Hopkins, and I'm the Dean of Science and Academic Engineering at Wayne Community College. Of course, community colleges are all about access and affordability, and many of our students are non-traditional. They're certainly not taking linear paths to their career. We provide both workforce education and preparation for transfer. So we have a whole library of students. The partnership that Stacey mentioned
was partially funded by the National Science Foundation. We're so happy to collaborate with the University of Oregon and the Knight campus to provide our students a pathway to industrial research careers that they may not have had any exposure to at all. So one of the things that we try to do is provide opportunities and exposure to high tech jobs that provide students with livable wages and affordable mobility that strengthens our community and our nation. So one of the big things about our partnership is that it really reduces barriers for our students. And many of the findings that were shared this morning from the report really resonate with me. Really the most important barrier to our students is the financial cost of education and affordability, housing, childcare. And so the scholarships that we provide both through the National Science Foundation funding and through the Workforce Ready Fund have really just provided such a pathway for our students and reducing that financial barrier. So that they can really focus on their education and academics. We know that these pathways are not easy. Many of our students are with us just getting foundational skills. So we do at the 2-year level. We're providing those basic skills in mathematics, chemistry, physics. Getting them ready to take those science courses at UO. Another barrier is really that social and cultural piece. And that's what we partner with university with, and I think CT does a really good job with helping students have that sense of belonging, go through our leader mentorship and just the providing space and connections for students to, be incorporated into the fold of the university life. So one of the things that we've been finding through this pathway partnership is that many of our students at the community college, they're juggling a lot. They have elderly parents, they may be raising children, they're working, and they come and take classes and they're sort of solo flyers. They come in and leave. They don't have, firm study groups, which has been shown over and over really increased attendance. So one of the things we try to do with the program in our cohort model is to get students working together early so that they have people to bounce ideas off of and study with. So that when they enter the university where students start, from their freshman year, a lot of times we see that they're already incorporated, they already have their study groups, so they know those ways to succeed in classes. So the social cultural piece is really important. And then the findings also mentioned soft skills, of course, which is incorporated into this program, where it's not only helping students toward the end with their interview skills and resume building, but also just helping people understand, how to interact in the lab. How just those cultural norms that some of us take for granted after being in the field for a while. And so what we're finding is a lot of success because we've, in addition to the political piece, we're looking at those things that really allow students to be successful and to navigate through these, their pathways of these careers.
Hi, everybody. Justin Thibodeau, Associate Director here at Henry County. Henry County actually was started about 10 years ago, particularly for that bridge of communication between industry and education. And so we were the community-based organization, we're a nonprofit that was founded particularly to pick up from the stage you go and ensure that there was communication between the education industry and that was happening back and forth. And so now that we're 10 years later, we're still very much in the middle of that conversation, locally at least. So we do things like arrange industry tours for CT programs. So CT classes and instructors can sign up for a tour to local tech companies. So students can really see the opportunities locally. We do the same for manufacturing, we do the same for healthcare, we do the same for natural resources, for the other like forestry products, also important. So establishing those kind of connections, with youth and getting them thinking about their careers early, middle school, career service, high school programs, job shadows. Giving those the opportunity to actually shadow somebody in the industry that they're choosing for about 3 hours on a given day. That's a huge opportunity for them to really see, is this something you want to do? Or is something I want to do in my life? And ask the question necessary to see what kind of programs they can enter. Also arranging internships. So we do tons of partnerships with internships in the summertime. Those are paid over the years to seniors in high school throughout Wayne County. I think our partnership now with 600 industry partners is enormous, and so we have staff members who are constantly negotiating those relationships and keeping them active and making sure not counting people too much. But so like that's with all the kind of career connected learning we operate in. And as we kind of extend our conversations with industry partners and education, there's also this need for youth supports. And so trying to break down as many barriers as possible. And so like then we have a whole team of resource navigators who for youth who come to us looking for these experiences, maybe they're not necessarily conforming education up by doing some internship, maybe they just need to get their first certificate. Because there's family support is very minimal, or they have their own house, and so we have some resource navigators who also connect with those youth, and they see get the pace and everything. So they're ready to just get in a better place and they can engage in career opportunities or engage in education or career. And our last kind of focus has been, as our most recent, for the last 4 years, is like out of school STEM opportunities. And so that's why we have this space and one in Gene. We develop these spaces at the same time as operating that program called Spark. That's why we have 3D printers, CNC machines, welding lab, all of those technical skills that, some high schools have intensive programs in manufacturing tech, computer science, a lot of them don't. That haven't really phased out and haven't been phased out yet. So part of our work is to get those programs back in the schools, so where we're not successful with that, we opened up these facilities so we can provide those opportunities ourselves. And it was mentioned that the ones that we do run really are prioritized for those youth who are underrepresented in the STEM fields, those who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, those who identify as LGBTQIA plus, or those binary. And so making sure that we can be a feeder program into those programs at school. So maybe that comes with a single program with us, maybe they meet us in middle school for some programs, spark that interest, and then hopefully give them the confidence to walk into that computer science high school classroom, which, let's be honest, is probably a teacher who looks like me, surrounded by students who are all white now, and who will be the only person of color or the only female identifying person in the room. That's a big ask, right? To be that first person to kind of diversify that environment in the school. So what we're going to hope to do is to gain more tools to be able to do that. And again, that's a lot of pressure on them, but that's not our goal. So hopefully in the coming years we'll see some changes into the into recruitment, into involvement in UO and OSU, into those programs from our students locally. The last bit of work we're going to provide is for 18 to 24-year-olds, mainly for those who, the social opportunities that also see are fantastic in UO. It's the small population that's not greater than I think, but even with social opportunities, even with full tuition, they can't quit their day job to engage with that education opportunities. Life is going to be critical, it's just not going to happen for them. And so the last piece of our program is for accelerators. We do one in tech, which is happening right now with education. We do one in healthcare. We do one in manufacturing. And then last one is culinary, which is going to be next summer. It's a little different one. But 18 to 24-year-olds have the opportunity to go on a cohort of about 12 small cohorts. They get 6 weeks of paid training with us, and then 4 to 5 week internship, ideally with a company that has job openings. It's not a requirement, but we advocate throughout the process to get them hired. If it's not a good fit and the youth is not interested in continuing, that's fine, but we do really try to support those youth throughout the entire program. We have career navigators, we have also professional skill building throughout the training, so they're not only technical skills, but collaboration skills, problem solving, critical thinking, and also resume writing, prep, all of those kind of things that need to kind of get a job. We're in our second year of those accelerators, and again, we focus on those entry level skills, so IT, they're learning IT support, which is about anything the Android needs. Network hardware, so working with like internet service providers for internships. There's a lot of different pathways, as you've heard, right? And so there's not just a one size fits all. When so we're internships are doing GIS, so like geolocation happening, right? With the local parcel record group. So there's a whole bunch of different pathways that you can go on, and they get some choice in those internship sites too. So they go tours to these sites, they get to kind of say where they go. They might get the first choice or they might get the second. And so working with those opportunities, with partnerships with industry, which I really work, I think we're seeing some good success now. Our last full cohort of manufacturing this spring, half of the 12 got hired. So that was a key win for us, and that's funded by those higher education, which can very well funds for so big. Yes, a lot.
So we've heard a little bit across the panel, some different ways that these organizations are essentially helping to break down barriers and increase collaboration, sometimes between and among educational institutions, whether it's, universities, community colleges, or nonprofit training providers. And then also with some of the priority populations, and employers as well. And I'm wondering, as you look around the room and, we're here as part of the Tech Consortium, what are some ways that a statewide platform like Future Ready could assist in further kind of expanding some of this work statewide, or even enhancing some of the work you're already doing here in the local region? You don't have to start with Mike if you don't want to. If someone else wants to jump in, feel free.
I can elaborate a little bit just on how we use this money, because it is so wonderful, flexible. Reporting is not overly burdensome, which is, as a nonprofit, reporting grant revenue is a huge part of what we do. So, yeah. First of all, it's that accelerator model. Youth are paid attention now from training all the way through internships, which is, again, fantastic. We actually move that barrier from, well, I started this job, that I what I'm doing, or why I'm doing it, but I have to survive. So come do this instead. That's the first piece. And then the extra support we're going to give. Gas card, any transportation help, bus passes, obviously they don't have a car, and anything in between that we can kind of negotiate with them to help them with transportation. It can fund some childcare too. Southern Future Oregon also is able to support housing. So we had one student who was in Florence. So again, as far away as Southern is an odd shaped county here, we've got a map, it's wide. So coming from Florence every day would not really be possible for him. So we were able to put him up in some housing situation, like 3 nights a week, attend training, and go back to the weekends. And so that was able to fund that. As well as like professional attire. So when it comes to internship, getting them situated in posts and making them confident and ready to walk into that workplace is really important. So helping them with that. So all of these kinds of supports in this money is impressive with anything you want with them, is required. I think we haven't identified yet we're entering our second year of business funding. We haven't found anything yet that has been like a hole that we've gone to Sarah and be like, we really use this. Sarah's shit out there. Shout out. We haven't found anything yet that's been a gap. I'll be real honest. So we're looking forward to hearing if there are some that it's just been great.
I'll share a little bit more about introducing Future Ready Order funds and some ideas of how broader engagement could happen. So through the NSF program, we're able to provide scholarships to students. It's limited in dollar amount, up to $2,000 per year, over 4 years. It tracks them from community college to UO for their baccalaureate and for their master's. As you mentioned, some students really aren't in a position to return to school. They can't give up that full-time job. And I find that a lot of our students are kind of at the cusp of barely being able to be back in school. The scholarships are helping, but there's still financial strain. And so through Future Ready Oregon, we've been able to expand scholarship offerings. We've been able to provide paid summer research for students, which is an essential skill if they're going to move into high tech, be competitive for the master's program. That's where they learn that incredible skill of creativity, problem solving in an unstructured space, and continual learning. We're using those funds to build community, to have opportunities for them to come together. Through Future Ready Oregon, we've also had interest from external donors who have given gifts that have allowed us to do things like buy meal cards for the students. So when they're on campus, they have access to food. We provided one student housing stipend, kind of a similar situation to which you described. So students, since we're serving low-income students, there's a lot of external pressures. We can't anticipate every student's external pressure, but the flexibility in the funds has really provided us a strong opportunity to retain students. And become really prepared for those careers in high tech. When I think about how do we prepare students for industry, the collectively, the educators, the community service organizations, the employers have to have a real understanding of the needs and barriers of one another, which requires really strong listening. I have found the US is not known for listening, we're known for talking. One of the trainings we do for our master's students, I mentioned we have embedded professional development. Before they take the technical coursework, we do 3 days of professional development, shoulder setting, tone setting. We do a full day on active listening. And I will tell you, every time we've done this class, we do it every year for the past decade. The students say, I didn't realize how bad a listener I was. My relationships have changed, with the people I'm close to. I realized I wasn't really hearing the problems or understanding them. And so I believe there's this really cool opportunity to pull together the stakeholders, but beforehand, let's do like a little reorientation of what listening looks like. We could give the people at the table like a 1 hour refresher. Here's how we're going to listen. Here's how we're going to engage. Here's how we're going to be curious. And then open the floor for discussion. Otherwise, we all come to the table with our talking points and we wait for the microphone to be passed so that we can get our spiel in. But we haven't actually explored what's actually out there or what the actual needs are. So, that's my idea of something we feel a little bit differently is we're convening people is to maybe equip ourselves, orient ourselves with the skills we need to get to the heart of the issues.
The wonderful point I want to echo that sentiment. I resonate with a lot of what you said in the presentation. The active listening skills, when I was about 18, I did a 1-week summer course at the University of Oregon by the Peter Susan Major, do work in town in terms of communication. I've done it for many, many years, and that was almost 30 years ago. And I still point to that 1 week as being the skills that I got in terms of really putting myself in the shoes, in terms of active listening, being extremely helpful and something that I use all the time with my entire team. It sort of comes down to some of our values. Our first company value is mutual respect, and I talk about that a lot with the team. And it's not just about sort of our respect for clients, working with clients and our own internal team, it's just really every interaction that we have. The second one being just a level of openness and transparency, strong opinions held rightly. That kind of also comes from that session with the Glazers is, a very, very small little blip in terms of the amount of time, but how a small thing like that can have really big impact. And what are the ways that we can get that small impact early on in someone's career, whether it's higher ed, whether it's even before that, to really just remind people of sort of what problems they're trying to solve in terms of sometimes it's not figuring the thing out, but it's really the relationships and the team building and focusing on that. I think one other thought that I had is sort of working with and seeing connected Lake County, we've had a few interns and yeah, just really amazing to see what they can do. I've worked with many people over the years and seen their origin stories, that first job, and how, it doesn't, from many different backgrounds, and seeing where they go from there. And wondering, sort of having 2 kids in for a day, wondering if there's more, there's expectation around Oregon schools in K-12 about more things involved in the schools, it does feel like it still is considered extracurricular. Many things that nowadays feel like these should be just expectations that go right there with math and verbal skills. And that it shouldn't feel like something that's extracurricular, but something that's really built in the fundamental mechanisms.
I just wanted to emphasize the grace given, the unrestricted nature of the funds that are coming workforce ready through the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. I just say thank you for trusting us. We know our students, we are good stewards of these funds. One of the things that's been a struggle for us with the more federally funded program through the NSF is that we're restricted to the numbers that come out of the FAFSA for each student. And what we're finding is that $10,000 limit per year, which is to cover up to the unmet need of those students as covered by FAFSA, is not enough. There's so many other unforeseen things that really is a make or break point. And so I can tell you, read lots of names of students that we wouldn't have been able to retain without that. So I just wanted to say thanks for trusting us, for providing the right opportunities for people.
So I just wanted to editorialize a little bit, this is just my contribution to this, in terms of the question about the platform that Future Ready can potentially play. I just think going back to what Melissa had mentioned earlier, the importance of having kind of career entryways into tech. And that's a lot of what this panel is kind of talking about and focused on, but there's also this series of later interventions, resources, opportunities needed as folks are progressing in their careers in tech. And I think that's the big question mark right now, in many respects, especially with the introduction of AI accelerating some of that uncertainty, is what role does, say, the broader workforce system, the community colleges play, potentially universities as well, where, you know, the sort of reskilling and upskilling and on-the-job training and other types of traditional resources that have flown through the workforce system, how can those be kind of reoriented or just made more readily available in many of the same agile, kind of non-directed ways that we're seeing success happen here across this group when it comes to just getting people into their first career opportunity or the first phase. And so I think there's an opportunity for Future Ready to also look at the lessons learned from the success here, and how do we also look kind of farther up the stack as it were, folks, because that's going to be a source of increasing disruption as well in future years. Wanted to see if folks in the audience have questions for the panelists. Okay. Go for it.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, I had to jot it down so I wouldn't space it out, which I still might do anyway. Some of what the survey results indicated, and I understand that was a subset of employers that were surveyed and some of the limitations that way. It's not exhaustive by any means, but some of what we've identified was, I think, framed up as inconsistent CTE experiences, or in some cases, results revealed a misalignment with industry needs and some of those things. And what I was wondering is, how do Oregon colleges and universities engage industry in curriculum development today? And how do you align with one another? I think about Oregon's community college system, for example, and everyone operating geographically as different spaces, but in many ways, sort of, I won't say in competition with one another, but that certainly could be a part of it. How do you align curriculum among the schools and universities, and then how do you engage industry in development?
I'll speak to the industry engagement piece. So I worked at Johnson & Johnson on a global industry development team for a few years before coming to the University of Oregon. So I have a background in the industry and my first job at UO, the senior or director of the industry. My job is to build awareness of our program to regional industries and to understand what industries needed for the curriculum that we had set up. We made several changes, getting feedback from these organizations. We integrated the design and experiments class, as we saw that was for all for entry level students, and our industry partners were telling us that we partnered with Chubb Software to ensure the software was taught alongside the course so that students were able to learn. We did something similar with CMX, which is an optical design software. So my first 3 years was really being that connection point between industry and the university, specifically our master's program. I mentioned our students do internships as a requirement for their degree. We do an internship evaluation with every student that is an hour long that involves some part of our technical team. Sometimes it's the faculty member, sometimes it's a higher level administrator. But we collect information on both the technical curricula and the professional curricula. We mentioned teams a lot. All of our curricula is set up to have a team-based focus. We look out for what we call the lone wolves. They will not survive our academics. It is set up that in order to be successful, you have to work in teams. So we try to embed those practices in the curricula. So we have very consistent connections with industry on an annual basis. Some people's primary role, other people's not primary role, but an annual occurrence as well. I'm always happy to be more broadly about challenges with implementation, pros, and different models. Our model works for us, it's not going to work for everyone. Yeah. And maybe I'll hand it to Jessica to speak.
Yeah, so I can speak to how this is handled at the community college level. So all of our career technical education programs are required to have an advisory committee that meets at least annually. And I would say these are critical. So and the strength of the partnership and the interaction among the program director and the advisory committee, it varies across programs. And so not surprising that we're seeing some variability in the responses to the survey. So the strength of the advisory committee makes a big difference in their level of engagement. We're always looking for more people to become involved and to give us feedback on our graduates. And those are for multiple programs that put their students separate into the workforce. So transfer, of course, is the consortium. We're required to have those, but of course, I oversee mathematics and what we do in math is we sort of other disciplines. And so we spend a lot of time talking to program directors and finding out what they need for the math required in that particular program. Right now, we're working on a project with our aviation maintenance group, with percent aviation program out at the airport, right in Springfield Eugene Airport. And we prepare students for flight and also maintaining aircrafts and helicopters. And what we are doing now is integrating the math into that program rather than saying to have everybody take not 75 ultimate for technicians. That's not really cutting it in that field. And so we have a partnership with one of our math faculty going out to the airports, learning what the students are doing, creating curriculum with the program director in order to embed it within the curriculum. One of the things that has changed as far as the Northwest Commission colleges and universities standards for accreditation is that we no longer have to include those reviewed instruction requirements of the RDO standards that you have to have, math, human relations, communications in your tech programs. You still have to incorporate those things, of course, but that sort of shifted in a way where you can embed it in a curriculum. You don't have to have a standalone math course. And it really takes that back and forth constant communication of, is this what we need? So we spend a lot of time doing that, but it's really from the employers, we just need continuous engagement, because especially in tech fields with constant changing, we're always looking for that and trying to get it first.
I'll think I'll, echo, you know, I think one of the things that's come up a number of times is the dynamic of things are changing more than ever. AI is, for example, an additional component to that. And with the changing, that also means, curriculum has to change with it. And a lot of what we do is, what we're doing next year or 2 years from now is going to be different. The languages, the frameworks, and so oftentimes what I'm looking for is someone that, not necessarily what their distinct skill set is, but really their interest in learning and their ability to learn quickly, which kind of ties to, if we're bringing someone that is coming right out of college or high school, we're sort of looking for, where's that passion that sort of shows outside of the courses that they've taken, but those side projects and that interest that they have on it with it.
I just add a few little things, just that kind of the lifelong learner piece, that's like going into tech, you're a lifelong learner, we're not gonna take it. Part of a lot of our programs, like our summer programs for high schoolers, to get invested with them, there's active parts of like searching for information. I'm not gonna give you all the information, you're gonna find it on the internet with any resources you can access, and then figure it out and learn as fast as you can, because that's really the reality of working in tech. Being able to troubleshoot by and able to problem solve. And then relying on a team to help you with that, right? So it doesn't make sense for all of you to do the same thing. Right? Allocate people to do certain tasks and then be able to like transfer information to groups, whatever you're gonna do, but be efficient. And then in learning. And as far as I will touch one piece on the industry relationships and maintaining that. I do a lot of work with that. And it's always a bit of a conversation too. We don't just send interns blind into an industry we've been working for. They have to sign on to our mission statement. They have to sign site agreements in terms of how they're going to support that youth. Having an intern is not a light lift, to be really honest, especially high school. And I'm sure it gets a little easier with math systems and everything, but no matter what, you need to have tasks and projects aligned for them to work on. You can't just make that one today. There has to be a real organized structure and some industry, part of industry education, I guess. But sometimes when they post a young high schooler, they can really hold a mirror up to their internal work culture in a way that they are all of a sudden, maybe they have done work around DEI or just using proper pronouns for you, remembering that and making an effort to really work towards that kind of inclusive environment. So, we do our due diligence on that end, but follow through on there is something we watch for and something we communicate to. And there's a lot of good reciprocity there. We want to scratch maybe one industry partner on our list in 4 or 5 years, so that's pretty good. When we post about it, we place less than 7 during the summer, so it's pretty great. But there is that, yes, more internships, but we also need industry to host more internships, and tech being the scale of remote work now in tech, you can't onboard a high school student into a remote environment. That's the level of responsibility and kind of, this is not going to be successful. Having that youth in their home for the first time working in a tech field remotely, it's not going to be successful. So we learned that the hard way one summer. But so now it has to be in person. Even if the come here to work in person with a cohort and the industry partner comes here, we have office space more. We've done that. That's what was worked around there. But that's one of the trouble of that tech piece. Yeah, remote work is going to be a lot of availability, but if it's your first tech job, remote's going to be hard.
We got room for one minute. I think we have for 1 minute. I think just take a research of what Jeff alluded to on curriculum alignment. There is at the university, there are national applications that come forward. Each of them. Majority of the curriculum is aligned nationally. And of course, the electives and stuff, the students might take up a particular preference. Every one of our majors, they have their own application boards coming in doing those. So there is some kind of, like that. I want to go back to Eric's usage of the term tech education. One of the terms was Oregon Tech Education. So after we are Oregon Tech, I remember when I signed up for this job, I went back to Ohio and it was newspaper headline that said Oregon Tech struggling in the living was the caption in our money or something. My wife said, "What did you sign up for here? What happened?" She thought it was the university. But they were out ignoring tech. I don't think that terminology is common. We don't call it Georgia Tech education in Georgia, that's myself. Anyway, that is the terminology. But do you think industries understand the scope of the term tech education? Because it is so inclusive when Intel calls somebody a technologist of the machine. The sophistication of the job is so different from another field called vision of technology. So what do you think? How do you think the industry is interpret the term tech education?
I would say I would know that it's a lot more broad than just people.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, and probably serves to define your organization or individual interpretation of what that is, to ensure as you're having conversations, this is not what we do. Is that it's aligned with what you're talking about, okay, and I'm going to add that one my things to do in future meetings. Yeah.
And I think it's not to sidestep your question, but the question then is, what do young people think of when they say? Because if we're not communicating the possibilities of that work, then we're failing and communicating the opportunities that are right here in Iowa. So we come to work like right in the state, right in the county, down the road, and just really explain that goes to high school career counselors who have, I don't know, 500 students for one counselor. That's not a problem. How can they possibly? But yeah, communicating those opportunities and just with endless possibilities involved is part of that job too.
Yeah, tech is a large umbrella. We have a lot of time, mentioned my two kids who were very interested from when they were tiny to try to push different parts of looking at it as robotics, it's software, it's Excel spreadsheet formulas. There are some things that are really simple that can be helpful for everyone in all sorts of jobs. I've worked with people and just notice when there are little things that I might take for granted or other people might. But sometimes explicitly teaching those early on, those subtle ways of working with software and having expectations with it, can really add up as, I think of my own history and just little bits and pieces over time, going, I need to figure out basics before I go, how I can appreciate what that means and how you use it when it comes up in other situations. There are just a lot of things like that, and there's also corresponding, there's a lot of, interest and excitement. I think purpose, especially at sort of younger ages, if those things were more incorporated into the younger age curriculum as well. But even in sort of sometimes in the higher end of the space, there are a lot of those pieces where there are many times when we have our engineers sort of jumping into something and you start taking for granted that of course they're going to know the next command line. There are certain pieces where I expect them to be surprised when they don't know just a set of things, but it kind of comes to that very wide umbrella of is it 3D? Is it there are a number of things I don't know something like that.
I was going to say that this is something we've struggled a lot with over the years. That it's GAO, we're often asked to by like law firms and other organizations trying to figure out how they restructure their practices to define tech. What is the tech industry? What does it mean? Occupation codes, or is lagging behind or not descriptive enough? And I think what's been really helpful is not necessarily what tech is, but starting with what tech enables. And so how is it being applied, and especially when thinking about inspiring kids or the next generation, or people who want to pursue careers in tech, starting with the why or what it enables rather than, how it works, all of that. Because once someone sees, wow, I can do this, I can achieve this outcome, they're going to be naturally curious. Most people would be or inspired to learn about, okay, how do I do this again? What is involved skill wise and component wise? And just by way of example, personal example, I first got interested in tech when I was a kid and was, drawing cars, with a neighborhood friend of mine whose dad worked for Pratt & Whitney in engineering. And they had an early home computer with AutoCAD. And for us, it was more about, we wanted to design cars, draw cars. And then we learned about drag coefficients, and you could actually test like your car that you built in this computer program, and that was just mind blowing. And then you want to learn about, okay, how does this software actually work? And I think that's how I think a lot of kids approach things. And the same thing with how we should inspire people to do that. I think. I don't know. Hopefully that's helpful.
All right. We have one final question. We're going to give them the final word again. And then we'll take a quick break.
One thing I saw in the survey was that AI is like other things. It's out there in the directions and that. So I respect the disagreements. But I wanted to ask, given everybody's jobs, and at least a portion of everybody's jobs will get accelerated by AI significantly, like up to a factor of 1,000 even. How do you think we should infuse AI curriculum into your respective educational organizations? But then from an industry perspective, how do you think industry should go about training employees to use AI into what they do on a day-to-day basis?
So I think about AI quite a bit. I've been working with it for 10 plus years, training machine learning models, reinforced that's, and yeah, the last 2 years have been eye-opening in terms of sort of new foundation models, just really open things up in many ways. And not something sort of being behind the scenes, because a lot of AI that 2 years ago was somewhat invisible. You absolutely have it, but people would know that, oh, Facebook, there's a lot of AI going into the web posts that people see. But tools that are front and center that feel like magic are going to be everywhere and having huge impacts. I think one of those areas is it's going to affect many different jobs, and one of those things is oftentimes that augmented intelligence, sort of working AI with human, is going to be more powerful. So then that's sort of, to your point, how can we get people to understand and sort of work with tools and feel comfortable safely working with AI tools? I think there's going to be a lot in terms of the companies making these tools and the trust that we will have for them, and that we can have that are sort of what's going to be that right into it. But the one element is really just what are people going to be learning about how to do their jobs better and faster. That does tie into it. If it is a 10x or a 100x, we sort of have that implication of, is there going to be enough demand for all the existing employees or team members that are doing that particular skill, and is now demand going to grow by that same amount? If it's not, then there will have to be other jobs that now that people have to do. You have sort of the legal industry, and all of a sudden, if people can do their jobs 10x more efficiently, people can also potentially have 10x more lawsuits and 10x more discovery. And so the demand might be up that much. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a good thing for everyone here, but there will be a lot of that. That's sort of the question in every industry is, what does that sort of demand look like with the supply that's goes up that much?
When I heard the term wild card, And I didn't interpret it as it may not impact, it was more of a unsure how it will impact, but we know it will. From an educational standpoint, one thing we're highly focused on is ensuring students recognize that AI is not a replacement for their ability to critically think and problem solve. So that is one thing we know we're addressing amongst students, know the material first, so that you know when something comes back and doesn't make sense, or if you know how to apply your critical thinking to have a community evaluation. There are far more capable people on my team to speak to where they see their individual sectors AI impacting. I will say these are the benefits of having conversations with industry frequently to understand, within your focal areas, how are their companies and industries using it, so that we can get that collective information and make some decisions on how to wisely incorporate it into the curriculum. So the short answer is, we're anticipating making changes. We don't know, but yeah, where this will be in our master.
Yeah, that's especially important in building those foundational skills that as Casey mentioned. We need to make sure that we have basic understanding before we have this partnership with this platform. So at Lane, we have an AI task force that was put together about a year ago. We have great staff representation on that. We talk about it almost every day. It was a big topic of our division meeting on Friday. So it's evolving so fast, and faculty are all over the board with across the campus in terms of their disciplines and how they're incorporating it or not. Many of our science faculty do incorporate it, they implement, they use. So just to make sure we have that.
Thank you. Yeah, keeping youth responsible use. This is a great thing, but also encouraging them to use it. They might have that much improved, but encouraging them to use it responsibly as a tool that can benefit them. And in terms of industry, I think we actually had a couple of high school teachers reach out, essentially reaching out for professional development around AI. One for their classroom, but also for their school in general, to educate their administrators on it's not just so great at this, let's give guidance. So the great to that kind of leadership, and so working with board and staff, like how we were trying to organize that kind of professional development opportunity for them. And then also showing how industry right now is using it. I know it's specific industries, huge lumber producer here in the county. They've been using AI in their facility for at least 5 years, in terms of like scanning logs, and it learns as it goes, and it increases productivity also. And so like seeing those kind of really cool opportunities that's being used already here. Is really awesome for students, for teachers to really bring back to their classroom, not have the same machinery, but really speak to it, right? And be educating people about how it's already being used, and that's how that kind of splits in relation on how else can be used. I think. So just being aware of all those ways of being used in a good way is the first step.
All right. Well, I think the takeaway is context matters in terms of how to define technology. So thank you to our panelists for sharing your wisdom and insight, and for all of you with great questions. How are we doing on time? All right. That's it.
All right, please do go ahead and take a break. The focus group findings, as well as the information that we heard from the regional partnerships. So with that, Ronan, you want to take it away?
Sure. So, hi everyone. To reintroduce myself again, my name is Ronan Fitzsimons-Bray. I'm the public meetings administrator for this consortium, as well as the healthcare and manufacturing consortia. I'm also the administrative specialist on the Future Ready team, and
Since about December of last year, I've been working with Carrie Delplane, who's the former manufacturing consortium strategist, in sort of understanding and implementing this new piece of legislation, House Bill 3306, which has some implications for the sort of legislatively mandated duties and responsibilities of all three industry consortia. And so what we're really looking for today from all of you is sort of a check on our process, how we have approached our understanding of the legislation, its requirements, and how we've attempted to actually go about sort of fulfilling those requirements. I'm going to cover 4 topics today. First, I'm going to go over a little legislative background to House Bill 3306. Secondly, I'm going to get into sort of some federal and state data and methodology that have informed implementation. And then thirdly, I'm going to sort of cover our initial efforts at putting together some of these databases that this legislation mandates. And at the end, we'll have some time for discussion and some limitations and considerations as well. So in terms of the legislative history of this bill, in 2022, Senate Bill 1545, which you all know is Future of the Oregon, was passed, which established in statute each of these 3 industry consortia. You all have been meeting since about April, June, August of last year. And then in February of last year, House Bill 3306 was passed, which amends the duties of all 3 industry consortia. And since about December of that same year, Dr. Carrie Delplane and I, as well as numerous other folks on the team, have been working on researching and implementing this particular bill. So what actually does it say? So in 2023, this bill was passed, and it includes a number of requirements for grantees participating in paid, or individuals participating in paid earn and learn experiences through future ready grantees. But the main really addition for you all to consider is that the language, it modifies the language of Senate Bill 1545 to add an additional duty, which is that each consortium must establish wage rate standards varied by locality for each skilled occupation within each of the sectors specified in paragraph A of the subsection, which is healthcare, manufacturing, technology. Once every 2 years, each industry consortium established under this section shall recalculate the wage rate standards described using relevant economic and employment data made available by the Oregon Employment Department, and B, submit a statement to the commission summarizing the methodology used to recalculate the wage rate standards and the date on which they will take effect. I should say here that initially, what stood out to Dr. Carey and I were these 2 terms, locality and skilled occupation. These are not defined in this particular statute, nor are they defined in Senate Bill 1545, so Future of the Oregon itself. And for us, really implementing this bill sort of hinged on robust understandings and definitions of these 2 terms, so how specific, how regionally specific do we have to go for locality? What defines skilled occupation? And I will get into that in just a moment. So in terms of tackling these occupations, we conducted a series of interviews with staff from the Bureau of Labor and Industries and the Oregon Employment Department, and really sort of boiled it down to 2 possible definitions for this first term, skilled occupation. So the first is really a strictly apprenticeship focused definition understanding. This is coming from the Bureau of Labor and Industries, and so this already exists in apprenticeship. This word is sort of defined in existing apprenticeship law. So an apprenticeable occupation is a skilled trade that is customarily learned in a practical way through a structured, systematic program of on-the-job supervised training, is clearly identified and commonly recognized throughout the industry, involves manual, mechanical, or technical skills and knowledge that require a minimum of 2,000 hours of job supervised training and requires related instruction to supplement that on the job training. However, there is a second definition for this term, which we believe is more applicable in this case, and I'll get into why, which is referred to as high skill occupations, and this comes directly from the Oregon Employment Department. This is a term that was formulated in partnership between OED, the Oregon Department of Education, the HEC, the Workforce and Talent Development Board, and the 9 local workforce boards. So a high skill occupation, according to the Oregon Employment Department, is defined as an occupation with a typical and educational level needed for entry of post-secondary training or higher, or occupations with an apprenticeship as a typical on-the-job training level, or occupations typically needing related work experience or long-term on-the-job training for entry and post-secondary training provided as competitive. So the reason why we're sort of leaning towards this term is, one, it's specifically related to workforce development. 484 occupations, so like federally classified occupations, fall under this definition, and regional employment department data is available for workforce regions and workforce subregions. So another reason why we're also leaning towards this as apprenticeships, while federally or sort of there's a broad scope of occupations that fall under that sort of strictly apprenticeship definition, those opportunities in Oregon are much more limited. Additionally, there was some sort of pretty explicit testimony received from legislators during the drafting of this bill that indicated this was meant, this bill itself was sort of meant to fill a gap in state education and training codes that exists for apprenticeship occupations, but does not exist for occupations that would provide through paid experiences. So getting into locality, again, this is not defined in House Bill 3306 or Senate Bill 1545, but it has been defined in pre-existing statute, generally in reference to prevailing wage rates for apprenticeable occupations in public works projects. So under this existing legislative definition, the state is sort of divided into these subregions. I won't read off what counties go into which region, but I also know that at this point, we have not done the actual work of mapping the wage data that we do have onto any sort of regional breakdown. So this is just to keep in mind. There are a couple of other possible geographic breakdowns that could be applicable in this case, mainly the local workforce development board regions, economic development districts, and minimum wage regions. So beginning with sort of the most sort of geographically specific economic development districts, the state is really divided into these regions that you see here. Zooming out a little bit, local workforce development board regions. And then sort of at the highest level, minimum wage regions. Ultimately though, as this bill mandates this body of work rely on data provided specifically through the Oregon Employment Department, we are likely to use OED's existing geographic breakdown of their wage data for mapping of the data that we do have across the state. This does not mean that in the future we can't use different geographic breakdowns to map wage data onto, but this is sort of just like the bare minimum that the legislation mandates we do. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the data sources that we've been pulling from in sort of both understanding and compiling these initial wage sets of occupations across each industry. So we conducted informational interviews with Jason Payton, who is an occupational economist at the Oregon Employment Department, and Stacy Rogers, who is an apprenticeship expert at PCC. So the sort of industry sector definitions that we're using, so like how do you define healthcare, technology, manufacturing, really comes from federal classifications, mainly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Those definitions are shared between BLS and OED. We are also using the North American Industry Classification System, the Standard Occupation Classification System, and the see if I can remember this off the top of my head. Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Program for the actual compiling of wage data themselves. That's all coming from the Bureau of Statistics. And the Oregon specific wage information is all coming from OED. And then the high skill specific occupation wage data is also coming from OED. So I'm going to try and provide a brief overview, really sort of 10,000 foot of OED's methodology in compiling this data, sort of as it relates to how we think about sort of the limitations, insights, and blind spots of this methodology and this data. So how does OED produce wage estimates in the first place? So all of their wage data comes from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics program, Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Survey or program. The data that we get from OED is based on these surveys from the past 5 years, and I think each survey itself is sort of is conducted in a rolling 3-year cycle that samples around, I want to say 18,000 businesses or establishments across Oregon per year. Occupations are defined through the Standard Occupation Classification System, which is set up in the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And an occupation under this definition is categorized as a grouping of number of individual similar jobs. So important to note here that there are some certain nuances that are perhaps lost in this definition. So, for example, the SOC system doesn't really take into account years of experience. It doesn't really take into account sort of we might call like it's primarily based on sort of the production being done, in other words. So whether or not an employee may have, for instance, a job that encompasses what we might consider multiple occupations, they'll be classified under the occupation that they sort of perform, that they spend most of their time performing, if that makes sense. Getting on to industry definitions, OED is in alignment with the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and using the North American Industry Classification System. Under this system, individual businesses are grouped into specific industries based on their economic activities, primarily on revenue data. And in general, OED and the BLS assign an occupation to a NAICS designated industry if 25% or more of that occupation's employment is concentrated in that industry. One thing to note about sort of establishments and how they're categorized into specific industries is that, again, establishments may have multiple economic activities occurring at the same time. In that case, they will be generally categorized into the industry in which the majority of their revenue is being derived from. So one of the examples that is sort of provided in the NAICS manual is that of paper manufacturers. Let's say you have a paper manufacturer that both produces paper and produces pulp. If the majority of that business's revenue is coming from pulp production as opposed to the production of actual paper itself, that organization is going to get lumped in under the NAICS code for pulp production as opposed to paper manufacturers. So it's just something to keep in mind. The exception to this, however, is you folks, the technology sector. There is no federally designated technology industry sector, according to the North American Industry Classification System. So in this instance, the OED has sort of gone with not their own definition, but they've really utilized a definition of the technology sector that I believe was formulated around 2013, based off of a Brookings Institute study. I'd be happy to send that out to anyone who's curious. I don't remember the sort of specifics off the top of my head. But in general, OED classifies as an industry as high-tech based on the percentage of jobs in that industry that are in STEM. The average STEM concentration of an industry in the US is around 6%. An industry with a STEM concentration 5 times above that national average is considered core high-tech, while industries with a concentration 2.5 times above that average are considered peripheral. And there's significant overlap, I will say, between the NAICS designated industries used by OED in their analysis of manufacturing and technology sectors, specifically pharmaceutical manufacturing, computer manufacturing, communications equipment manufacturing, audio and video equipment manufacturing, semiconductors, navigational measuring, medical and control equipment manufacturing, and aerospace product manufacturing. Here's the actual list. I'm not going to read all of these out loud of the NAICS designated industries used by OED for their analysis of the technology sector. There's about 200 occupations that fall under these industries, of which around, I'd say 2/3, I think, are classified by OED as high skill. And we, get into that later. So one thing I will flag for you all here, and again, this may not make as much sense because you don't have the data actually in front of you, but there are several occupations really across all industries, also in the technology industry specifically, that are not classified as high skill by OED, despite having registered apprenticeship opportunities available in Oregon. This may seem initially to run counter to one of OED's methods of classifying an occupation as high skill. In other words, it has a typical on-the-job training level of an apprenticeship. In short, while some occupations do require an apprenticeship to be certified, others do not. So while an apprenticeship opportunity may be available and even encouraged for a specific occupation, if it is not a requirement, it may not be classified as high skill under OED standards. There's also, from my conversations with OED staff, it appears there's some significant lag time between the data actually getting published itself and the sort of apprenticeship standards that are more regularly updated. So getting into some of the considerations and limitations to keep in mind while viewing this data, and I've put some of these questions on here to hopefully like jog your brains in sort of thinking about the different directions that we can take this in. Will the wage scales for apprenticeable occupations be set by the wage estimates that we are going to have available through OED, or by using the determined rates from BOLI or the local apprenticeship committee for that specific occupation? There are a number of occupations classified as high skill, which are generic. In other words, are not specific to a specific industry. On the other hand, there are a number of occupations which are specific to the healthcare technology manufacturing industries, but are not considered high skill. So which of these, if not both, will be included in the published wage estimates? How will the consortium address interim changes, such as increases or decreases in wage estimates? What wage percentile will be considered entry level? So OED processes wage data for the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles for high skill occupations, and I should say occupations in general, but does not have an official standard for which of these constitutes an entry level wage. Similarly, will an entry level wage be considered the wage rate standard in terms of the legislative requirements of this bill? Will this include the wage progression schedule? And will we attempt to adjust, amend, or update this data in between the determination years? What circumstances, rather, would warrant us amending, updating, or adjusting this data in between determination years? So to close, to provide us all some opportunity for discussion and next steps, what other groups, what other organizations, what people would find this information helpful or are already sort of engaging in this kind of wage mapping work? What is the landscape of occupational wage data? Where are there gaps? How can this work collaborate or align with existing wage data mapping efforts? And then what we'd really like to do in your next quarterly meeting is bring you maybe a subset of the 200 or so occupations that are considered to be within the technology sector. So we can actually see some of the data. So are there specific occupations and associated data you would like to see presented at this next consortium meeting? I will open it up to the group here for thoughts, comments, questions, anything else?
Do we have a list of all Oregon businesses or industries code according to this? Is there a database of companies, how they are coded, which sector they are part in right now, etc.?
So I heard you have, is there a list of businesses in Oregon that are identifiable in one sector or another? That I don't know off the top of my head. I do have, that I don't know. I do know, so I know like the sort of industry codes that OD uses to do for the three different sectors of the manufacturing technology. I don't know whether or not they have data on these sort of specific like names of businesses and where they fall in those six codes. But I'm sure we can that's something we can investigate and look into.
I'm sure that Business Oregon has access to employer lists by NAICS code. I think for our purposes, from the workforce perspective, the distinction is that sometimes the NAICS code doesn't fully represent the entirety of the workforce employed by that employer. The NAICS code represents the majority of the workforce. As a distinction. One thing, the two questions that we're really hoping for first, any questions, comments related to the content presented, but then really try to think about two things. How we may use this data, and it may be helpful to actually see the data at the next meeting, have something to react to. But are there specific occupations, as Roman mentioned, there are in excess of a couple hundred, and that might be less than digestible in one sitting, so. Are there particular occupations that we should focus on in preparing that first set of data to come to you, in the first quarter of 2025?
I'm curious how those positions will be used. What happens with those data?
So the question was, how will the data be used and what happens with it? And I think we're asking that question back to you. We statute directed, legislature directed us to publish wage rate standards for occupations within healthcare, manufacturing, technology. And part of the exploration of that is to better understand how you as a consortium might use that data, how we as staff might use that data, what other groups might be interested in accessing the data.
So it was not safe.
Okay. Okay, the observation was that it would be helpful to understand how the wages compared out of the state. I think.
My question is similar to Melissa's, just wondering, this was a legislative mandate, right? And so what was the intent behind it? What was it that they were interested in, or why? That might help me think about how, how this data is going to be used.
Sure, Roman, I mean, I can say that there's another portion of the bill that's related to urban learning training opportunities and um, and making wages transparent to education and training participants. So I think there's a transparency element to this. Connecting wages, wage progression, career laddering, and credential requirements. Maybe another overlay, that's something that the consortium of strategists have been talking about to connect those dots.
Since I had the privilege of being a consortia person before I joined the governor's office, I struggled with this bill a lot. I'm like, okay, what's the point? What are we doing? But this data, where is it headed? But then once Ronan shared the data with me, I was like, oh, and for healthcare, it was really different because it's just such a highly regulated, you know where exactly you are sort of in the career ladder because there's an occupation. But it was helpful to see some of the wage disparities between the entry level and more advanced and the lack thereof of the career ladder. And you can start to map the education and bring the pathway to that. But I think of some of the technology discussions we've had around there not being, in particular for priority populations, any sort of career pathway and ladder that's clear, and then peering into the unknown around the wage difference. When you think about economic mobility and supporting priority populations on a pathway to economic mobility, having better data to support just strategy and our thinking around that is then I came full circle of like, oh, I think this data could be really useful in strategy, regardless of the intent of the legislation.
Oh, yeah, I was. Back to the current pathway conversation, we pretend, so if I got understanding correctly, I would have like software engineering as a job. And if you have, entry level versus, senior director, whatever, it would be software engineer, starting salary, max salary. Some kind of distribution profile, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, basically, yes. I would say the nuance is that it's not necessarily even starting, it's 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles. So we can maybe glean or infer something about starting salary, but.
I'm wondering if we reverse engineer the path to be able to say for pathway compensation. Those folks who are in the 75 percentile and above have X number of years of experience by average, have this many degrees of credentials, have served in these many job posts prior, because then you could put that in front of you, go like, hey, here's the recipe. You need to have some composition that looks like this. If you want to get to that job title or that job post and that thing. Is that what?
I would clean for a day. That exercise would be fantastic. Whether it's possible or not, I have question marks, but I'm sure there's resource constraints. There's also the probable disconnect between individual level data and being able to look at that longitudinally, which makes me some of those. But I think there's a disconnect between what is available at an individual level to be able to understand that whole impact that you're talking about, as opposed to at the aggregate. And understanding that disaggregated potentially by race, ethnicity, gender, But some of that may be available, and given that we have access to post-secondary education data readily available for particular programs or degrees or credentials, there could be some coupling of that. But that's a great question that we'll capture and see what is possible. Other questions? Have we?
I think I would just, have to say, I'm uncomfortable with relying on my own skills to interpret that data. And I don't know the value that teams that I can pull out, that I wouldn't be projecting my own stuff onto. So it'd be great if along with that data, there were other people who spend their time with data, not necessarily to do the same things, to identify the things that they see and walk us through what they're seeing in that, rather than relying on my skills to say, hey, and present it to those, what's happening. So,
Yeah, that is such a great point, and I think, I hear two things. One, sort of, we're not gonna just give you data and let you run with and interpret it, we'll provide some context. And two, I think coupling it with some sort of a tool or a communications piece that makes it easier for you to talk about outside of this space as well. So those are things that we'll be sure to follow up on, and I think I am curious if anyone has thoughts about specific occupations to begin this with, but I think what we'll probably do at your next meeting will be to take a small subset of occupations. You can actually see what data is available. We'll do a little bit more internal around what's possible. And then it'll give us another, one more layer to the conversation. We wanted to make sure that you had access to the information about what was required first. But did I capture that, sort of those two pieces? Right. Thoughts about occupations. I can tell you that, as Sarah mentioned, healthcare is pretty straightforward. There are some, and complex, it's both. But there are some pretty specific occupation categories that the consortium has already prioritized, that they're like, start with those. In manufacturing, we talked about some of the particular skills that the consortium has identified as priorities, and we're gonna grab occupations from there. Either approach works, but we want to make sure that we're providing you something that's meaningful when you have the opportunity to look. So, thoughts about occupations.
If you have, it means it's hard to. Would there be value in looking at those hard to fill positions that were identified by the folks? I think there were, we needed them.
Software is a good cost. Yeah, that's an option.
I feel like this engineer, like, say,
Engineer in a packet.
Manufacturing. Software, hardware, electrical, all of that stuff. And I think about this too in terms of like finance specifically, basically have all different kinds of engineers, except for like aerospace, civil engineers and the engineer that's not fully employed. So in this case, engineer can kind of like break it down into that is not, I feel like that would be better described.
Okay. Identify occupation categories that Engineers, technicians. By, hard to fill occupation.
I was about to speak, so I have the list. For the record, software developers, data scientists, electrical engineers, environmental scientists, renewable energy engineers.
I mean, whatever, the times, like, that's a huge one, social media, like, about AI, that's the website that is working with engineers to about.
That's super helpful. Thank you. All right, well, I think that gives us.
Yeah.
Enough to start to work on sharing something with you at the next meeting.
Yeah, that's a great list. And it may be more expensive than, I mean, I'm thinking particularly of like the engineer category, like, there's a lot in there. But definitely, yeah, looking forward to it.
If there is lots of data, that would, whatever that is, I think it would be good to work on. Okay. One thing with it. Excellent. Thank you so much. This, I think this is a big body of work that we're hoping to, provide you in digestible pieces, but Ronan has been doing a significant amount of behind the scenes over the last, gosh, I don't know, nearly a year. To get to this point, and we can see that there's a lot of variables that have to be defined, and I think we're starting to see what's possible with the data. And look forward to bringing you more next time. All right. I'm gonna bring us home, but you go first. Please.
Those are fine. I just like, help me to understand how this is basically like, we're going to create a record file, so fragments of data, like if you want to pay specific data, we're trying to create a database of our own, basically, for organizations, services that are accessible to all organizing businesses. And we have okay, that makes sense. Like, I wanted to share that in case that helps things, but other people's minds too, because basically the rapid and exceptional tool to have, but it's an exceptionally expensive tool to have, and so having basically the same level of data available for us, people to our teams, people to entry for our working year, that we're focusing on is like the role as part of that.
Just add on to that, we used to partner with Bradford, doing like wage and compensation trends data, but the problem is it's always lumped with like Greater Seattle, and so it skews to points to the north, and it's not helpful for breaking down Oregon and the cost. And I would say just comments in helping pull in companies that would be interested in potentially contributing to that. I do think that would be a really amazing resource for the state.
Excellent. There's something new to them. All right. I am going to just spend a couple of minutes talking about our medium-term objectives and what to expect next. We have spent a lot of our first year together, a little bit, almost a year and a half, together doing a lot of shared learning, and we've certainly reached some decisions together. But as we're looking to 2025, we're really starting to think about what's possible for this shared leadership table, and how are we able to inform education and training and our workforce and talent development ecosystem specific to the tech sector, tech occupations, and tech talent development in Oregon. So next slide. As we start to look to 2025, the foundational charge for this group is to make strategic policy and funding recommendations I missed the word manufacturing, I apologize. To make strategic policy and funding recommendations to address technology workforce gaps and high-tech workforce opportunities. We initially, you may remember when we launched the work, proposed a work group structure that included responsive education and training and opportunities and integrating employer needs in education and training. And when we launched that group, the big question was, well, we can't really do that work. We can't integrate the needs of employers until we have a better understanding of the needs of employers. So that's part of the work that we've been doing this year. We also talked about the integration of workforce supply and workforce demand data. And we talked about strategies to advance a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive high-tech workforce. In our charter update that you approved at your last meeting, we removed those specific work group references and really said those may be the right work groups, but the consortium really needs to decide what is going to best advance your work and where would you all like to dig in. And so for 2025, we really need to move towards setting that standing working group structure. Several of you participated in the funding work group that we stood up this year, sometime before yesterday. And that would be an example of an agile working group where we pulled together a group of consortium members and other subject matter experts to really address a specific issue, time limited, duration. This is the intention of establishing a standing work group structure. And Shauna will be working with your leadership team to develop some strategies around that and bring something to you at the next meeting. Additionally, we'd like to start talking about success measures, both how we're evaluating the high-tech workforce and talent development ecosystem pipeline, and evaluating the impacts of the investments and innovative approaches that have been made through Future Ready Oregon, but then also how are we measuring the collective impact of this table, of how this table works collectively, and so starting to think about performance measures. So those are going to be foundational to your work for 2025. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, we visited this slide a number of times, but our work really is informed by our collective learning. It's driven by principles that were established and identified by you all in the beginning of this work. And then with that lens of what have we learned and what are the principles that we're applying to this work, being able to act on emerging priorities. So how are we setting ourselves up to respond to strategic opportunities? Next slide, please. As an example, we learned through the funding work group where some of the priorities were for the tech workforce development, including career advancement and upskilling opportunities, and then a focus on recruiting and expanding education and training programs in tech. The principles that informed that body of work were workforce data, looking at emerging opportunities that have been identified by you all as consortium members, continuing to be informed by industry, and thinking about how the consortia adds unique value or a unique lens to the conversation. Additionally, always think about our alignment with the governor's priorities and other statewide priorities. And then as we look to our work ahead, continuing the opportunity for employer input and engagement and continuing the opportunities to learn from Future Ready Oregon grantees and other partners as we did in the partnership panel today. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, we will move towards having one meeting annually in other parts of the state. So this quarter, the Healthcare Consortium met in Medford, and the Manufacturing Consortium met in Redmond. I keep saying them first, and we are now in Springfield. And again, the opportunity is for you all as consortium members to continue to be exposed to what's happening in workforce and talent development across the state. Learning from and being inspired by partnerships that really reflect the ethos of this shared leadership table. And as a statewide advisory body, it is important to us at the HEC to provide opportunities for engagement by folks across the state, and having these meetings that you all as an advisory body accessible to other community partners like we have joining us here today is important. In quarter one, so our first meeting, we're also gonna move our winter meetings to a fully virtual meeting so that folks aren't having to worry about travel, and we're not having to navigate those sorts of complications. So your quarter one meeting will be virtual, and at that meeting, we will likely be talking about the year 3 annual report, which is due to the governor and the legislature in December, and we'll have some of the preliminary workforce rate grant participation data included in it. We will also be announcing the final most recent workforce ready grant awardees in the coming weeks. That public announcement is forthcoming. And so what we would also like to do is provide you all with a list of all of the tech specific projects that have been funded through workforce ready grants. So that you can see what are the active strategies, partnerships, focus, occupation and credential focus areas for that body of work over the next 2 years that organizations have to continue those activities through the ARPA funding. So we'll bring both of those things as well as this additional information about wage notification data to you in quarter one. And then last slide is just in 2025, we'll continue ongoing employer engagement, looking for ways to build on what we learned from the focus groups, continue to learn from Future Ready Oregon investments, and more to come as defined by you all as a consortium. And so Shauna will be able to lead your next meeting and a conversation about what that work group structure might look like, what those outcomes might be specifically for the coming year. And I think the last slide just is watch for your 2025 calendar coming soon. But do folks have any questions about what's to come? Yes. We should have just left the microphone.
I don't have a question. So as folks are likely aware, Intel is going through the process of staff. So I just wanted to create awareness that so Intel is going through the process of staff. It's a tech sector body. I thought I would just flag that with the support of the PAO and workforce system and LHA, we're going to try to have a robust job fair and invite those folks who have been affected to talk to people who want to hire highly qualified technical talent. So that's what we're interested in on LinkedIn. We'll get you connected with me.
Thank you, opportunity. All right, super. Well, we are at the end of our formal agenda. Skip or Ben, have any final words before I hand it over to Jeff? Okay. So we're gonna transition, you'll get a moment of break, but before we transition to the tour, wanted to give Justin the opportunity to tell you what to expect and maybe just adjourn the meeting for us today with some remarks about connected lane, and then we'll take a short break before we head out on the tour.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Again, just amazing to have you all here in our space. It's always really fun to have people here and to hear what we're being done. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to stay as panelists, but also just be listening. So I thank you all for being here. Yeah, I can happy to have a little tour. It's about 23 minutes. I know a lot of you travel far, so captain the road, again, no hard feelings. But I can also keep it brief. You'll get to hear a lot of the kind of program that we run, that we operate here. There's also a lot of services. Not all just like different data and creation. It's a lot of support networks that we build for youth and how we can do resources. So seeing it in the live spaces kind of makes it a little more real. So it's much more interesting to listen to my voice. I promise. But with that, I mean, adjourned, and thank you for coming. If you're ready for the tour, when you're ready, like 1 o'clock or 1:05, we'll start it like over there by those pictures on the wall. Now.